Hello and welcome to Analog Insights. In today's episode, Jules and I restore and review the Yashica Electro 35GS. This is a beautifully designed, compact Japanese rangefinder from the 1970s that comes with a really fast and fantastic 40mm lens, a built-in lightmeter, and an automatic exposure mode. And as such, it is particularly well suited for street photography, but also traveling. Jules and I always had an eye on this camera, especially because of its nice design, and only recently took the plunge of buying one, but we didn't buy one in a great condition, but instead decided to go one that was marked as broken and that just needed some love. And we also thought maybe we create a new format called Restored, where we, on a more regular basis, tackle old lenses and cameras and restore them. In part because we noticed, looking at the success of the Leica IIIa restoration video, that there might be more people out there interested in this topic. But also on a more personal level, I always looked up to Jules with all his experience that he collected over time in cleaning, lubricating and adjusting cameras, so the whole CLA process. And he acquired all these skills, and I thought like, hey, this is really interesting, and I would also want to learn more and develop these kind of basic CLA skills for starters. And then I thought, why not take you guys along in that learning process and in the journey? Because if I can do it, basically somebody like me, that might encourage you as well to just give it a try, if it looks easy enough, in my case. And because of that and many other reasons, we thought, okay, let's do that and do a very first episode in this new format called Restored, focusing on the Yashica Electro 35GS. And in this case, the video will be focused on a basic cleaning of the camera and changing the light seals. So something that comes up quite a bit in the CLA process. And then in future episodes, we might tackle more difficult topics. Why this new format? We both believe that it is essential to have these basic CLA skills further down the road to ensure the continuous availability of film cameras, because it's economically much more efficient and reasonable to repair old existing film cameras than waiting for established manufacturers or even new kids on the block to create the production capacity that is needed to create cameras on the same level as they were created throughout the entire 50s, 60s, 70s and so on. And it's just more economically reasonable to just repair old ones. And of course, there are great examples out there when it comes to making a huge contribution to the community. I can think of the Finnish Camera Rescue Project that repaired and restored over 100,000 cameras since 2010. So 100,000 film cameras that were reintroduced into that cycle and are now available for purchase and being used again and so on. And we thought, how can we, with our little channel, make a contribution to the community? And the best way to do that is probably this format, sharing the expertise, the limited expertise that we have and that especially Jules has acquired over time, and looking a little bit at my own learning journey here and sharing that to encourage others to do that as well. So we hope you enjoy our first episode of Restored, focusing on the Yashica Electro 35GS. The camera cost 70 euros plus 6 euro of shipping off eBay and was marked as broken. And as part of an estate, the description clearly stated that there is no guarantee about the functionality and that it would be working. So it was really a typical shot in the dark, and I was just hoping, based on the images that I've seen, that it would be in a fairly okay and good condition. And yet I was a little bit concerned and nervous after purchasing it and before it arrived here, and was then quite relieved when it finally came to see that it actually came in an ever-ready case and appeared to have been stored in that case all the while, which is always a very good indication because it of course helps to retain a certain condition of the camera if it's not just sitting like that somewhere in the basement, but is properly covered in a cover that was made and created for the specific camera model. And in this particular case, I just got lucky because this was not visible on the images that were shown on the on eBay and in the description. But if you are hunting for old cameras, it is advisable to look for these kinds of cases because you might end up with cameras in pretty good conditions that were just not tested because of lack of skill or something similar. Looking at the camera, it smelled like cameras smell when they have been stored for quite a while, so I was not that surprised about that, but it's always a little bit in the beginning. And then looking through the viewfinder, I noticed that it's a little bit foggy and also dirty. And most importantly, I noticed that all the light seals in the back were quite degraded, but other than that, it felt to have its basic functionality. The shutter appeared to be working, defaulting to its 1/500th of a second that it always takes if there's no battery inside. I also checked the battery compartment, checking whether it had any kind of battery leak in the past, which was not the case. So a completely clean and nice battery compartment, which is always a good sign. And based on that and the research that I'd done before, I then also ordered a battery adapter for 10 euros, which arrived rather swiftly and not just came with the adapter, but also a battery included. And that enabled me to test the basic functionality in terms of electronics and seeing whether it works or not. And then I also took the plunge and purchased a comparatively expensive rectangular lens shade that is really, really nice in my opinion. And Jules pointed me in that direction and I just had to purchase it. It was comparatively expensive with 34 euros, but it is an old new stock, as they are called. So it came with the original packaging and everything, and a really nice Yashica branding. So I immediately fell in love with it, and it fits the camera perfectly. So overall, it's less than 120 euros for an old, really nice 1970s camera that just needs some love. And that's what I then try to give it with my limited skills that I had when starting out. I had observed how Jules is cleaning cameras in the past a little bit, and had done some first attempts, so to speak. But this was really the very first time that I tried it properly, and had a couple of recommendations collected before that coming from Jules. So he recommended to use isopropanol for cleaning in combination with cotton swabs, and then a lens cloth for polishing afterwards, and also use a cosmetics brush that in this case I got an old cosmetics brush from my girlfriend that she allowed me to use for that purpose, to get all the rougher dirt off first before then cleaning properly. And that's also what I did. So first using this one here, the brush, and then for each area that I cleaned, I used the cotton swabs drenched in isopropanol. And then after cleaning an area, polishing it a little bit with the lens cloth, and like that, slowly moving around the camera, being particularly careful with the optical elements, so always making sure that there's no kind of dust or little grains of something in my cloth, and also being extra careful cleaning around the lens, the aperture rings and so on, that the isopropanol, that there's not too much, that the cotton swabs are not too wet, so to speak, and there's not any kind of fluid that could get inside the lens like that. And like that, I slowly and patiently cleaned the camera, which is actually a very nice act that gets you more familiar with the camera, and is really a joy to do that. And in this case, on a calm Sunday morning when I just had time, it was quite nice to do that. And at the very end, I opened the back and also cleaned roughly in there, kind of removing some of the light seal parts, the degraded light seals that had already fallen off. But I was very careful not to remove these at that point in time, because I wanted to keep that for the next step when I actually had Jules with me to get some proper tips here as well. So this is what I did on that particular morning, and here you have a before and after comparison of the initial cleaning, as I would call it. And then I yeah, took it to Jules to get some more advice on what I could maybe improve in my cleaning process, and most importantly to learn how to replace the light seals. Arriving at Jules' place, he also looked at the camera and pointed out a couple of spots that I could clean as well, or could clean a little bit different or better than I had already done it, and also showed me how to clean certain parts. He also pointed out that it is advisable to use a little bit more tools than I had done. So for instance, it is advisable to have a little blower, like a dust blower that you use to remove dust from your negatives, handy as well, because you can easily remove pieces of dust, for instance, that might collect on a lens or the optical elements before cleaning them. And also for removing certain dust and rougher dirt, it's much easier and less intrusive to just use a dust blower. Also for the degraded light seals in the back, for instance, it's easy to do it like that. He also pointed out that next to the isopropanol, it makes sense to have a white gas for cleaning, because the isopropanol primarily solves the dust and mixes with it, not the dust but the dirt, and mixes with it, while the white gas is better for actually removing it. And depending on the section of the camera, it makes sense to apply some white gas and work with that as well. I found that very interesting. And then also he showed me specifically how to clean the optical elements using basically glasses wipes and a dry lens cloth in combination. So as you would typically know and do it as well, but this was interesting to then combine it sometimes with the toothpicks in order to get into every corner of, for instance, the rangefinder window or the viewfinder window. That I also found interesting, and how easy it can be if you have the right tools to then clean it and do that. And I saw quite a difference between my initial clean and then that I considered pretty good, and then after what I had learned and applied that, how the camera then suddenly looked like. I then learned how to replace the light seals, and that was particularly interesting for me. At first what we did is open up the back and put a little bit of tape in front of the lens and the shutter area to avoid any kinds of bits and pieces to fall into that. This is a very small piece of advice, but a very helpful one. And then I removed and scrapped all the old degraded light seals out of there, and try to really clean that as good as possible. Also using sometimes special tools that Jules had available to get into these niches and corners, and really ensure that the old degraded light seals are as much gone as possible to have a clean underground again. And then Jules showed me how the material looks like that you use to replace the light seals, and then also how to measure the size of it that you need, and then how to cut it properly using a box cutter and a cutting mat as a foundation, and to not apply too much pressure when cutting that, but rather do it 2, 3, or 4 times with little pressure to avoid that it moves too much, because the material has on one side a sticky element that you can use to glue it or to stick it to the area where it should be placed. And if you apply too much pressure, then it tends to twirl or to move a little bit too much, and like that it stays very sound and correct in place. And then I practiced applying them and putting the light seals, after measuring them and cutting them correctly, on the place where they should be and where the old ones were. And I started, of course, with the easier locations after Jules showed me how to do that. And then I had a little bit of trouble applying it to the more difficult areas, the long parts here at the bottom. So Jules took over and showed it to me. And then I was very happy, and it was very rewarding to me to see that I could actually pick that knowledge up and do it myself here for the other side. And the most important trick here is to use something like tweezers that help you apply it correctly. And the tricky thing is to ensure that it's not turning in that process, but that the sticky part always remains at the very bottom and is sticking to the bottom and not suddenly to the side of where you want to place it. Because then it wouldn't simply work and wouldn't hold. But at the very end, if you've done it correctly and it looks nice, you can just close the back, wait a couple of moments, because then it's really putting it perfectly into place. And then if you open it up, you will realize there's a bit more pressure on the back now with the fresh light seals. But if you've done everything correctly, they're perfectly in place now and it looks as new, basically. So this was really nice, really rewarding to me. And the only thing that I then did is retest the battery compartment to see whether this is fine. And put a final clean on some elements of the camera that got dirty now in the course of the adjusting the light seals. This is also a piece of advice that Jules had, to always think carefully and work in a certain process, and not to jump back and forth between different sections, especially not working with something dirty on the optical elements and then jumping to a niche section again and back to the opticals, but instead being a bit more structured, so to speak, when cleaning a camera. And I found that also very helpful. So it needs a little bit of discipline, but then you can really, as you can see here, clean and at least change the light seals of a camera quite easily with basically tools that most people will have at home, plus maybe a little bit of white gas and isopropanol to make it really clean again. So now that it is restored, let's take a closer look at the camera. The Yashica Electro 35 was released in 1970, and there are two different versions of it. One is the black one, the GT, and the other one that I have here, the silver or chrome one, carries a small GS here on the front. Its most striking feature is the fantastic 6-element 40mm f1.7 lens that close focuses to 0.8 meters, and also features a self-timer on the lens itself that first needs to be set and then goes off after pressing the shutter release. On top of the camera you have a dial to set your ISO between 25 and 1000 that communicates with the built-in lightmeter. Of course, you have a shutter release button with a lock function and a film advance lever, as well as a really nice and pretty film counter that can also be illuminating by pressing the battery check button here at the back as well. On the other side you have the typical film rewind lever, plus if you pull it upwards you open the back of the camera, and in the center is a cold shoe, and most importantly two little lights that indicate either overexposure, that would be the red one, so whenever you reach 1/500th of a second or above in terms of what the light meter is reading, you would get a red indication. Or if you have slow shutter speed, so 1/30th of a second or slower, you would get the orange indication warning you of the slower shutter speeds. And looking at the lens, you also have little indications of that are a little bit Sunny 16-like, with the clouds and the sun and which aperture to use for which purpose. That of course can be manually set here. And this combination of being reminded of too slow shutter speeds or overexposing, plus these little icons here on the lens, really shows you this was a camera directed at consumers at the end. The back of the camera only features the relatively large viewfinder window, which is nice, and that red battery check button that I've mentioned before, as well as a pocket where you can put a slip of your film packaging as a reminder which film you put in there. And the bottom features a film release button, which you need for double exposures or when rewinding the film, plus a tripod socket and the battery compartment, which I've mentioned before. On the side of the camera is a PC socket for the flash synchronization. In contrast to the earlier Electro 35 cameras, and here I can show you where this particular model is standing in its whole series and this whole tradition, all the internal electrical contacts are gold-plated to prevent oxidation from impeding the flow of electricity around the circuits. And without a battery to power the camera or the meter, the shutter automatically defaults to 1/500th of a second, so you can still use the camera with that, knowing that of course this would be your shutter speed, and then only optimizing the exposure using the aperture. But this is theoretically possible to work with it without a battery. And originally, as briefly touched on, the camera came with mercury batteries, which of course have been discontinued since then. And by now you can simply use a 4 LR44 battery with 6 volts and the fitting adapter. Very simple, very easy to use, and then you're good to go. So it's not a camera where you have to have a huge concern about finding the right batteries. There's an adapter for it and it works perfectly fine. The light meter uses a CDS cell, which is located above the lens. So if you're using filters on that lens, you need to take that into consideration by manipulating the ISO setting accordingly. And when shooting the film speed on the top plate, interestingly, a twin-bladed diaphragm closes in front of the light sensor. And the light meter then measures the accumulated light level on the film plane, releasing the shutter only once it has determined enough light has exposed the film. And like this, the shutter is completely stepless, and the metering system can keep the shutter open for up to 30 seconds in total. So really interesting shutter design. That is a little bit similar to the Olympus Trip 35, if you remember that review. And overall, a really nice, beautiful camera. And in general, the entire series is interesting, but particularly these later models, as the GT and the GS, and the ones coming afterwards, are a bit more refined and particularly interesting if you're in the market for Yashica Electro 35. So what about our personal impressions? The Yashica Electro 35 is a true gem in our opinion, and it can almost live up to a Leica CL when you would also use it with a 40mm lens. It can almost compete with that, despite the fact that it's in a completely different price range. What stands out to me personally is its beautiful design, really clean and timeless, and what I particularly like is that 1970s vibe that it has, especially little elements like this atom sign here, that was quite common at the time on many cameras and was obviously not referring to the atoms but the electrons around them, kind of hinting at everything that was using electronics and electricity inside, and having some flow of energy, in this case to power the shutter. And to illustrate that magic, so to speak, they put this little atoms sign here on it. The test shots also turned out fantastic in my opinion. I'm positively surprised what is coming out of this lens, both as a black and white look, but also in terms of color rendering. In this particular case, we shot one roll of Kodak Gold 200, mostly on a sunny evening in Munich. And yeah, really nice results that came out of it. And we believe this is the perfect travel companion if you if it requires light packing and you still want to bring a camera that has a fantastic lens and where you don't compromise too much and you are fine shooting 35 millimeters, then this is a fantastic camera for that purpose. Because of its rangefinder focusing and also zone focus capabilities and so on, of course, it's also well suited for street shots. I can certainly imagine using that and using it for that and being quite fast with the focusing. And beyond that, the only downside really is its size, especially in comparison to a Leica M, for instance. The camera is surprisingly large, especially because, of course, of the wide aperture lens that it comes with the f1.7 as the widest aperture. And to me, it reminded me a little bit of the modern digital Leica Q series, which is also such a perfectly integrated system, in that case with a 28mm lens. In this case here it's a 40mm, but it had the same effect to me of being surprisingly large and yet being perfectly integrated, and everything nicely fits together, and you can really feel how the camera was designed around that lens, and I have a similar feeling here. And I don't mind that it's a little bit larger or on the larger side. It just handles nicely and feels really nice and solid, and it is beautiful to look at. I combined it personally with a wonderful accessory at the very end to kind of top things off. I not only bought that lens shade, but also added an Oberwert strap to it. The Oberwert vintage Mosel strap here, which in my opinion fits perfectly in terms of color and looks and so on. And this for me put the icing on the cake, so to speak. So a really, really nice camera and look. Photographically, the only downside in my opinion is that it does not have any kind of exposure lock function or a real manual setting. So in a backlit situation, for instance, you have to compensate using the ISO dial, and that's the only compromise that you have to make. Other than that, it's just a really nice and fantastic camera. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this very first episode of Restored, focusing on the Yashica Electro 35 GS. I also hope that you could pick up some new skills and learn a little bit about how to clean a camera properly and how to change the light seals. I certainly did learn quite a bit in the process of making this video, and I hope that it was interesting to you. As always, we cannot guarantee success. As always with these kinds of repair instructions, it at the end depends on your own skills and how you approach it and how structured you are. And it also depends, of course, on your specific camera model that you need to repair. In our case, we get a little bit lucky, as mentioned, in terms of its condition, and especially we get lucky when it comes to the electrical components, that there were no problems in terms of the circuits or the batteries had never leaked and so on. So it was really easy to just get it started again, going again, and it was mostly cosmetically to fix that and get in some new light seals. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please remember to like it and maybe even share it with your friends, and don't forget to leave us a comment in the comment section below. As always, Jules, Greg and I really appreciate each and every subscriber coming our way, so don't forget to subscribe if you haven't. And yeah, thanks for watching. I hope to see you soon. Bye.